The central argument here, and I'll just jump right into it, is when it comes to economics, which in Greek means management of a household, it also implies efficiency, to economize. This is a natural order type of system that is natural to the earth, to the environment that we inhabit. Something science stumbled upon. You don't do certain things. You don't pollute the atmosphere by burning oil. It creates climate destabilization. We can stick with that example and extend that on to infinity as far as how we are bound by natural order laws. Nothing metaphysical about that, nothing esoteric. However, what's happened traditionally is we have a system, a market-based system, a system that's based on really old traditions of people engaging in labor, creating trade. We've developed this thing. We started with handicraft, making it very simple, and we've evolved this industry that is massive, money made for the sake of money. Wall Street, the financial system is bigger than anything, which makes perfect sense, since at the core root psychology of this system is this notion of trade only, not social betterment. So to finish my thought, we have this natural law system, this natural law economy, which has been superimposed upon by this capitalist free market system, if you want to call it that in distinction. I use I'm going to say market economy to generalize throughout this conversation.
Okay.
And what's happened is that they're not in accord with each other. And the problems we're seeing in the world, both on the human level and the ecological level, is this discord. We're taking a square peg and trying to fit it into a round hole.
Peter, what are your thoughts on Jordan B. Peterson?
Well, not to be contrary, but I'm not a Jordan Peterson fan because he doesn't take a proper sociological perspective or a structuralist perspective on human behavior and the organization of human society. And his writings fall back on very primitive, socially Darwinistic, Malthusian, hierarchical views of human relationships, meaning basically in support of elitism by some kind of biological determinism.
I often think comically that if you paid sociology professors 3 times as much, the probability that they would be anti-capitalist would decline precipitously. Like, I think a lot of it's driven, because there's a lot of smart people in academia, and they're underpaid relative to their intelligence. So, and that doesn't make them happy, so they get bitter and resentful about that, and they think, well, there's these goddamn bankers who are hauling in $20 million a year, and here I am, hardly struggling, but here I am struggling comparatively, and that's the issue, is comparatively on $100,000 a year, $120,000 a year.
But I envision a world where people are actually able to get what they need, and it becomes a social reality as opposed to a material and vindictive and status-based reality. It doesn't mean that hierarchy doesn't exist in the future or in an idealized society, because there are other things that we do. I'm not a visual artist. You're a visual artist. I'm a musician. There are natural hierarchies that happen, and we respect those hierarchies because we appreciate the talents of people, not because they have more money than you, therefore you're supposed to glamorize them and look up to them as though they're better than you. That is a complete contrivance. So there's always going to be a natural hierarchy, which is good, because that proves our group mind, it proves our collaborative sense that you can do things that I can't do, and so on and so forth. That's what motivates the collaborative sense and the power of our society as a civilization. And if we can bring that formula together, we could get everything back on track.
So we could have an intelligent discussion between the left and the right, and the discussion would go something like this. You need innovation, you pay for innovation with inequality. But you need to bind inequality, because if it's too intense, then things destabilize. It's like, okay, we could agree on that. We've got the parameters set. Now we have to start thinking very carefully through how to do the redistribution issue, and we don't know how to do that. So you might say, well, we have a guaranteed annual income for people, which I think is a horrible solution, by the way, but it addresses the right problem. The problem is that we're hyperproductive, but the spoils go to those at the top, and some of those resources need to be funneled down to the people who have zero, so that they have an opportunity to at least get to the point where they can innovate, and so the whole bloody thing doesn't wobble and fall. And and I would say in some sense that's what the political discussion is about. But we've skittered off into these radical oversimplifications, which is something like, well, if you have more than another person, you're an oppressor and you're evil. And if you have less, it's because you're virtuous and victimized. And that's just a non-starter.
So you think that there's a real problem with something like universal basic income?
Universal and basic, they are ill-defined. Most people, when they speak about universal basic income, they actually have in mind national basic income.
You think it's a horrible idea?
There are ways in which this can be mitigated by, some democratizing force, where everyone has access to this technology. But I think ultimately we need something like a universal basic income. There has to be some way to distribute this kind of technological wealth more fairly to the rest of the world.
Well, I think the idea that the solution is a basic income is not a good idea, because I think the problem is deeper than that. I don't think the fundamental problem is that people don't have enough money.
Right. They think in terms, okay, we'll tax Google and Facebook in California and use that to pay unemployment benefits or to give free education to unemployed coal miners in Pennsylvania and unemployed taxi drivers in New York. The real problem is not going to be in New York. The real problem, the greatest problem, is going to be in Mexico, in Honduras, in Bangladesh. And I don't see an American government taxing corporations in California and sending the money to Bangladesh to pay unemployment benefits there.
I don't think the fundamental problem is that people don't have enough money. I think the fundamental problem is that human beings, in some sense, are beasts of burden. And if they're not provided with a place where they can accept social responsibility, social and individual responsibility in an honorable manner, they degenerate and die.
So this isn't some inevitability of the way we live. What is the silver bullet that can possibly transform this negative trajectory that we're on? And that is structural change of the economy. Morality is not going to do it. Our free will is not going to do it.
Human beings, in some sense, are beasts of burden. If they're not provided with a place where they can accept social responsibility, social and individual responsibility in an honorable manner, they degenerate and die.
Our rational sense is not going to do it.
At a certain point where the richest people will realize that enough is enough, we have to spread this wealth, because otherwise people are just going to show up at our compounds with their AR-15s or their pitchforks, and the society will not sustain it.
Our rational sense is not going to do it in and of itself, because we are so inhibited and dominated by the structural psychology generated from our social system.
And that's been the American dream, right? And that's a really high power antidote to inequality. It's like, well, yeah, there's some inequality. We need it to keep the generative mechanism going, but the game is fair and you can play it too, and there's some reasonable probability that either you or someone you love will be successful. So it has to be a straight game, and that's why ethics is so important, to keep this landscape stable. People can't play crooked games, and the rich shouldn't be fixing the game if they want to hold on to their money. And the problem is that some of them, although not all, some of them are fixing the game. And no one's happy about that, and no wonder,
The first issue that jumps to me is what I call the denial of principle continuum. It's a continuum fallacy, or a matter of degree fallacy. This is the argument that presents two seemingly separate conditions that in truth cannot be considered distinct, as the same principle actually exists behind both of them. For example, the state, which of course I agree with your basic criticisms as far as effects, but the problem is that there's an erroneous separation of behavior and the creation of the state from the underlying philosophical principles inherent, and intense, I should say, inherent to the historical premise of the market system. The market necessity of competition, self-preservation, differential advantage, and self-interest does not and would never stop at the traditionally assumed edge of the market board game, if you will, where the referees stand. It's like having a football game and assuming everyone's going to stay within the lines. It's not like that when you consider what's at risk. The state and its creation and its use as a tool for differential advantage is simply another strategy or tool in the gaming strategy of competition.
And I'm just as uninformed as the next person, so I'm capable of commenting on this. It seems from the outside that the rich disproportionately benefited from the restabilization of the economic system. And people are not happy about that. And they shouldn't be happy about that, because it indicates that there's something fundamentally rotten about the game. So you could say, well, maybe people can tolerate necessary inequality if the game isn't rigged. And so that's why everybody has to act in a manner that indicates that the game isn't rigged. And that means they can't rig it. That's really what it means.
And that's a kind of, it takes a humbleness for the human psyche to kind of relinquish your sense of free will and volition, to recognize that you are a part of something larger, and it is having an effect on your behavior. And it's almost a paradox in terms of consciousness. So again, I talk about that a great deal in the book. Jordan B. Peterson, he misses all of that, and I think it's a very critical thing to be discussed. But we could debate those issues another time, cruelly speaking. So, I'm not gonna. Everyone has positive things they can contribute to this discussion that are thoughtful. But when things turn into ideologies, that's when it becomes dangerous. And I think there's some characters out there that are writing about society, and they get some things right, and then they get some things so wrong that it just keeps the spiral of confusion out there.
If I understand your most recent book, Enlightenment Now, correctly, you are saying we need to understand that we as human beings have never had it so good, and that in terms of statistics on world hunger, on poverty, on loss of life to warfare, that really things are rather wonderful on our planet today. And that isn't the way that many people in both the developed and developing worlds actually see and experience the world.
So what's wrong with the system we have now? Doesn't it kick ass? Aren't we number one?
Of course we're number one. Number one in a lot of things, a lot of negative things, unfortunately. A lot of life support systems are in decline. We have growing destabilization across the world. We've watched Occupy come and go. Well, it's still lingering, but in different forms now. We've watched a number of different crises emerge. Climate destabilization is still on hand in a very strong way.
That's right. Because as long as tragedies and problems haven't been reduced to zero, there'll always be enough of them to fill the news. And since our sense of risk and probability is driven by anecdotes and images and narratives rather than by data, unless we actually see the data, we can miss the fantastic progress that has been made.
A statistic, you have many great statistics that are great examples of how bad things have gotten with our system, our economic system. And one of those things that I've been repeating ever since I read it was 63% of people in the United States can't afford a $1,000 emergency. Yeah. And so this is the richest country in the world.
By 2030, I think the stat was 60% of the world would be in a water-stressed area. There's nothing positive in those trends at all.
It's all these patents on medicine. It's disgusting.
Well, I mean, think about the people that wanted to make generics. I did document this in the book as well. There were people suffering from tuberculosis and HIV-related diseases, and they were looking to make their own generics. And the Western pharmaceutical industry, including all the way up to the White House, said, nope. Intellectual property restricts you from producing this. You have to buy it from us. And finally, they gave them like a little bit of a discount.
Only hundreds of dollars, not thousands per pill, per cancer pill.
Sociologically speaking, and in fact, sociology itself, the idea of the synergy of everything that's happening, having its effect, and then you start to think about what is having stronger effects on human behavior and culture versus other things. This is an important conversation because and this is actually a good part of my book, if you understand the structure of society that's incentivizing people, motivating them to do this and that, to become elitist, to become groupistic, to become bigoted, you begin to understand what's driving that, then you can change that condition to stop that behavior.
I get attacked all day long. The world is finite. We can't make an abundance. Obviously, it's a relative notion. I mean, the sun will eventually burn out. It's abundant to us in the long term of time. So it's not about, suddenly there's a magical amount of everything. It's about using the efficiency and, of course, focusing the economy on the interest to have an abundance. Because in our current society, it's the antithesis of what's rewarded. We reward scarcity. We want things to be generally scarce. The corporate construct does. Business doesn't want there to be an abundance of anything. So the pollution of the water supply, that's great for the water bottling companies. So we're rewarding the exact opposite. So you can't have sustainability, preservation, efficiency in a society that rewards the opposite. And therein lies the great contradiction of the capitalist system.
The values are all relative. If we leave this materialistic culture, if we stop this obsession with consumption that has been imposed upon us, we could find balance to an extent where we drive our values and importance from how we relate to each other, how we help, how we contribute to the world, how we better ourselves in a deep personal way, not how many cars we have in the garage or anything else.
So there's room for an intelligent conversation about that, right? Because the lefties say, too much inequality. And they need to be listened to because the evidence is quite clear. If you let the inequality ramp up enough, the whole system destabilizes because the people at the bottom think, fuck it, we'll just flip the system upside down.
Right.
No one wants that. Like right-wing conservatives don't want that. So because you could make a Republican argument and say, don't let the inequality in your neighborhood get out of hand because the crime rate will skyrocket. And the empirical evidence on that is overwhelmingly strong. Inequality drives crime. Now you can argue about why, but the fact that it does that's not disputable.
As the old saying goes, if we all agreed, there would be no progress. So everyone has to kind of, I mean, that doesn't mean that the pluralism of our reality, meaning that the disparate beliefs, everything deserves the exact same attention, of course. We have lots of people out there that believe ludicrous things, and you see this amplified with the kind of Trumpistic reality and the decry of fake news, and the people dismiss ideas now just because they don't fit their ideologies and so on. But yes, I won't go on that tangent, but yes, obviously disparate views can find resolution if people are being objective, and I'm always open to those conversations.